Well, again, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the AA-ISP Virtual Learning Webinar Series. Just want to take a second to introduce myself. My name is Cameron Hobbs, and I'm the VP of Marketing and Operations here at AA-ISP. I'm going to be playing your host today and kind of helping with some of the background, technical side of what we're going to be learning with our friends here, Andrew and Jake. So why we're here today. So we're here to learn a little bit about how business has gone virtual. We all know this, right? That's why we're here. But how's your sales strategy? And so this session is brought to us by Accenture, and they've put a lot of work into making sure that you have some really awesome templates and processes that you can take away after this session. So with that, we only have 30 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to both Jake and Andrew. And they can introduce themselves, but they're with N3, which is part of Accenture. We're going to be very interactive, kind of in a few little ways today. We're going to have a few different polls, and then you can use your chat or Q&A function throughout to send in any questions, and we'll get to those at the end. With that, Jake, go ahead.
Thanks, Cameron. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody. My name is Jake Duffy. I'm the Vice President of Global Sales Strategy and Transformation with N3, part of Accenture. What you're about to see, the portions that I'm presenting, I've delivered to a plethora of the Fortune 500 teams and organizations around the globe, the tools, techniques, and procedures, not only for sales, but also virtual sales. And luckily, I'm joined with a friend and colleague, Andrew Fritts, Senior Vice President of Global Sales. Andrew.
Thanks, Jake. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you today. Excited to be talking to you. Yeah, so as Jake said, I'm Andrew Fritts, SVP Global Sales for N3, part of Accenture. Just a quick word on why we are going to tell you some of the things, or why we know the things we're going to talk about today. N3's role within the Accenture family is to be the outsourced demand and revenue management arm. So we produce digital sales, marketing, and customer success motions for some of the biggest companies out there. And we're going to borrow some non-proprietary lessons from some of those programs to tell you about how sales has gone virtual, both pre and post-COVID. So with that in mind, I think we're going to send out a quick poll just to start generating some interest from you guys. We're really interested in finding out how many of you were already considering an evolutionary move from a traditional sales model to more of a dependence on virtual and inside sales. So if you could go ahead and just give me a quick answer to that question, I'd really appreciate it. And I'll show you the results as soon as I finish this next slide. And I've submitted my own result there. So while you guys do that, yeah, one of the key points that we wanted to make early on is that this evolution that's been going on, that's been forced upon us by the pandemic, actually was already in motion long before February or March of this year. Many of the companies that we work with had already begun to adopt new paradigms in their sales motions, frankly, with the advent of cloud technology and the move over to monthly subscription models and so on. And not just in the technology industry either. We've seen this from other spaces as well. That move to an always-on selling model and taking advantage of virtual sales strategies was in place because people had gotten to a point where it was time to move more of their portfolio over to an inside sales motion. They were taking global programs wide scale and taking things from a multi-regional approach over to a global concept. There was also an increasing interest in moving traditional sales tracking from qualitative metrics like, hey, my call went really well, over to quantitative. How is messaging, targeting, qualification, statuses, et cetera, performing? And those things are much more trackable in a virtual sales model. You also saw folks starting to invest and experiment with outsourced sales models even before COVID. And lastly, inside sales began to be tracked by more than just what we would call sort of vanity metrics like pipeline amount generated or SQL generation, and actually be directly linked to close won revenue. COVID, of course, made all of these things much more acute and made the dependence on these things much more urgent. Now, of course, all sales has essentially become virtual, at least for the current reality that we're in right now. You've also seen, difficult economic impacts to a variety of different go-to-markets, and so the need for closed revenue is greater than it's ever been. But not all of these things are completely new to this evolutionary process. Okay, with that said, let's see what you guys responded on the poll. Okay, so pretty good mix of folks. A third of folks already had been prioritizing virtual and inside sales. That's great. And then some folks who are just now beginning to start focusing on it. Thank you. That's great.
Andrew, before you go any further, there was one
Yeah,
quick question in the chat just to clarify what you had just mentioned
sure.
on the move went from quality to quantity or vice versa.
Actually, yeah, let me edit that slightly. It's more from qualitative tracking to quantitative tracking. So this refers specifically to the idea that traditional sales meetings, in a field sales environment are very based on anecdotal summaries of what went on in a client call. In the move to virtual sales, you actually have a lot more tools and instrumentation available to you. So you can actually instrument and track the way every message you're using is performing, what the word clouds are, and so on. And you can optimize those things across your entire rep force as long as you're nimble enough to do so by virtue of the tracking that you've done. So you can empower your sales leadership and managers to actually make changes to messaging across the whole team based on what they've learned about how various personas are reacting to specific messaging, targeting, offers, et cetera. So there's a lot more ability to do that than in a traditional field sales model where you're fairly reliant on what happened in a conference room or at a restaurant, et cetera. And that there's a lot of power to that. Now, with that in mind, I guess we'll go to the next slide. So one thing we wanted to do before I hand off to Jake was give you a sense for what we've seen from a pre and post-COVID world, given our scale. We're running at any given time a few hundred of these programs. So we get to see into what the paradigm shifts have been from a contact standpoint. And our tactic mix, as you might imagine, has transitioned significantly in COVID. So there are some aspects of this that you would think are sort of obvious, and other things that have stayed more similar than you would have thought. Obviously, pre-COVID, we were heavily teledependent. Post-COVID, there's a much bigger mix of email and LinkedIn being utilized. You can see the email sent numbers went from 5.5% up to 28%. The other interesting thing about email is that it's not just us sending the emails, it's actually us receiving emails back as well. Our response rate from email has gone up by 6x, which is sort of incredible. But I think that it's really a testament to the idea that other folks have gotten around the idea that business is going to be transacted differently now, and they're going to be more comfortable actually transacting through their laptops and their email than previously. We've also seen much more incidents in use of cell phones. As you'd imagine, you're not able to call into standard offices anymore. You're much more frequently coming into possession of the client's cell phone number, and that allows you to do things like, once you, of course, have opened up a good business relationship with them, to move into a text-based tactics and so on. And then the last point on this slide that we really wanted to make sure you understood is the bag that you're carrying certainly does matter. We've certainly seen that some of our client friends are more impacted by the pandemic than others. As you can imagine, it's a more difficult time to sell heavy enterprise implementations like ERP. Cloud technology has sort of remained static, or if anything, gone up a little bit. And then things that are very top of mind right now, like unified communication as a service, are performing better than expected. So I think the overarching point is, it's not as though sales has gone into hibernation during this time. You just have to control your tactic blend and really think through the instrumentation of your motions so that you can continue to achieve the key stat you're looking for. In this slide, the last thing I'll say is the key slide that we're looking for from any one of these tables is that connected TCR. That means target contact reached. And as you can see, we were able to actually even increase our target contact reached in COVID from our pre-COVID setup. So with that, I think I'm going to hand off to Jake, and he's going to walk us through some things in his portfolio of sales transformation.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. But before we get started, guess what? There's another poll coming up. There's a couple questions for you to answer. Let that pop up. So you got 2 questions, pretty simple questions for you. And I've got a lot to cover, so it's going to be a fire hose. I already apologize now for talking fast. There's a lot of material and content to get through, and I want to be able to explain everything to you. So of course, you got 2 questions there. We'll take a look at that in a second. Now, when we talk about the foundation for successful virtual sales, and you put it all in one slide, which is difficult to do, you got the knowledge, skill, and ability revolved around time management, team development, and technology mastery. Now, the flip side of that, the other portion, is the processes needed. We utilize plan, brief, execute, debrief, and guess what? There's a lot of stuff in each one of those circles. and especially in the execute, right? Because that's where a lot of stuff happens. But we're going to talk about planning. We're going to talk a little bit about briefing. We're going to talk about some execution. We're going to talk about debriefing in these upcoming slides. But first, before we get to that, how the poll answers look. I know that was a quick amount of time to answer them.
Got about 64% completed. Anybody else want to throw their answers in there real quick?
Maybe I'm able to get through everything in 15 minutes so we have some Q&A at the end.
All right, we'll go ahead and end this now. And then just a reminder, if you answered yes, you can throw, what you're looking to kind of learn into the chat, and we'll see if we can help with that.
74%, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So as we understand, you can have the same process, but maybe the way you execute it is a little bit different. So yes, there's no golden arrow or silver bullet in virtual selling, but the way that we execute is definitely going to be different. So let's talk about those things. Now, first and foremost, planning is pretty simple and basic, right? Now, a lot of what we're going to talk about is pretty basic stuff. Now, if we look at good football coaches, just as a quick example, Vince Lombardi, or love him or hate him, Nick Saban, I guess, depending on what part of the country you're from, are very good, or were very good, at making sure all of their teams were brilliant at the basics. That's what we're talking about in virtual selling, being brilliant at the basics. Now, whether you're a new seller or an experienced seller, guess what? You can get task saturated. And when you get task saturated, a lot of that basic stuff goes to the wayside, and you're tactically focused, not strategically aligned. So we need to recenter ourselves. And of course, hopefully some of you have been doing that over the past months, because you've realized doing the same thing you've always done is not going to get you anything different. And planning is very important, although I would say completely underutilized in a lot of organizations I work with, and even sellers, surprise, surprise. But planning is extremely important. Now, the way you plan is, of course, different, right? Whether you're a hunter or a farmer. And a lot of the times I see a lot of sellers say, hey, look, Jake, I make a strategic business plan for every single account that I either manage or I target, every single year. So then I say, all right, let's take a look at those tactical chunks to accomplish that strategic plan. Your quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily objectives. That's sometimes where things start to fall a little flat. So we really harp on daily sales planning. And there's a lot of different methodologies to use. Some people say they use Microsoft Outlook, although I'm going to say that's more of a time blocking tool and not necessarily a planning methodology. Some people say I use a to-do list or a task list. But if you're like me, I've got a running house to-do list that's spanning 2 years now. So we need to attach some time to some of these items on there. So when you look at it, think about it as a course of action. Who, me, you, Andrew, is going to do what by when? In addition to that, KPIs and goals. Look, we're selling. Those need to be first and foremost. And they change every single day. Maybe they get better or they get worse as your days go on in your month. You need to know exactly what they are, because that's your primary remit. Who you're going to call, what titles, industries, messaging are you going to focus on that day? Now, some of you like us, look, we're going to target multiple different industries. Now, a lot of sellers are good enough to try to, transfer and switch between industries. But what I like to say is, focus on one industry at a time. Your messaging, your value proposition, your pivot points, they're all in there in that space of that one industry. So when you do get somebody on the phone, it's a better conversation instead of having to pivot back and forth if you have that differentiation. The other piece is, when are you going to execute this stuff, right? Your power hours, your prospecting, your enrichment, your professional development. Don't forget about that. Habit number 7, Mr. Covey, sharpen the saw. You need to plan for all of those things, even lunch, because I know there's a lot of people out there that work right through it. You need to plan for lunch. And in addition to that, leveraging past lessons learned. We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to creating agility through debriefing. That's where lessons learned come from. But what we're doing is we're leveraging what worked in the past and what didn't work, not repeating the same mistake twice. Now, when we talk about execution rhythm, operational tempo, I'm sure everybody is aware that in the virtual world, working from home, it's a little bit different. And it's very easy to accidentally flow your way right to the end of the day, look back and go, did I get everything done that I needed to? So we utilize the simple process, plan, brief, execute, debrief as benchmarks or checkpoints throughout our day. Every seller plans their day. That seller briefs their team, their plan. They execute what they say they're going to do according to their plan. And at the end of the day, they debrief. Pretty tight execution cycle, execution rhythm, operational tempo. So next, you may have heard of it. You may not have heard of it, but I can tell you right now that this is one of the first things to go out the window with sellers because it's somewhat difficult to do. Touch cadence. Now, what's the difference between the field and, work from home? So as an example, I'm in the field. I'm going to call Andrew. He's my prospect. He doesn't answer. Go figure. I don't leave a message, and I mentally remind myself, hey, I'm going to call Andrew tomorrow or next week. And guess what? I'm a sales guy. I get busy and I don't call Andrew back until I sit in front of my sales manager and they say, hey, Jake, guess what? You got about 30 people here you've contacted twice. I'd recommend you reach back out. Why is that important? Well, at N3 and various data sources that you can find, it takes about 6 to 8 touches to get in contact with anybody. And now with the COVID-19 scenario, we're pushing closer to 8 or 9 touches, okay? So you probably already seen this sales statistic, but most salespeople stop at about 2 or 3 times. And there's a lot of chicken on the bone between that 3rd attempt and that 9th. So how do we mitigate this? Well, we stay disciplined to a touch cadence. So I'm going to reference this a little bit. If you go to our website, you're going to see a slide at the end, n3results.com. You're going to see some templates and some materials, some takeaways for you that explain some of the stuff we're talking about. There's a touch cadence template on the website. So you can take a look at that. And they're all pretty much built around what type of sale is it? Transactional, relational, sales cycle, short, long, and even ADV, right? Average deal value. So as an example, let's just say we're dealing with a relational sale, longer sales cycle, higher ADV. We want to touch cadence about 15 touches over 25 days, because I'm sure we've all seen that salesperson that sends you 4 emails in one day and you've already irritated that person. You don't want to do that with a valuable account. So day 1 of the touch cadence, I'm going to call Andrew. He doesn't answer. I don't leave a voicemail. I send an email. 2 or 3 days later, that's when I pick up touch cadence day number 2. Now the difference being we're not in a plane, train, or a car, so we have more discipline to stay to the schedule of the touch cadence. So don't be that person dialing somebody 2 or 3 times or outreaching 2 or 3 times and then quitting. You got to get to the 9th time and sometimes even the 12th time. So make sure you're implementing a touch cadence, very important in the virtual environment. Now, although
we
another
we have a good question that's related to that last slide in the chat that I thought you might want to handle. There's a question about power hours, when we find the best time of day or night to reach decision makers via email and LinkedIn.
Sure, good question. Actually, very good one. We found Mondays horrible. Okay, everyone's got meetings back to back stacked. The best days we found are Wednesdays and Thursdays, usually the afternoon. And let me give you a little tip. If you're trying to contact the executive suite and you're calling or reaching out during normal business hours, you're probably not going to get anything. Before business hours, after business hours are the best. Later in the afternoon has worked. But here's the key point. Every region is different. Every country is different. From Germany, where I've been, to London, to England, and the United States, everything is a little bit different. So debrief with your team and find out when they're having the best connect rate, and then implement that lesson learned. Very good question. So moving on to power of teams, pretty basic. Everyone knows it. You need to leverage the cognitive diversity of your team, the knowledge and experience. Now in the field, you can really feel like a lone wolf, right? You're going city to city, country to country, only to report back into your sales manager, you're lone wolfing it. Well, guess what? If you haven't figured it out already, the virtual environment triples that, quadruples. I mean, it's amazing because now we feel even more like a lone wolf. There's no water cooler, there's no kitchen, there's no colleague sitting next to you. So we need to implement some form of process to bring the team together. We utilize briefing in the morning and debriefing in the afternoon. We also use stand-ups, and some organizations use scrums. Now here's the point. You can't just have a meeting, bring everybody together with no objectives to talk about what you ate last night or the random football game that was on a Wednesday afternoon yesterday, Steelers and Ravens, if you didn't catch it, right? We're not talking about those things. We're talking about objectives, sharing lessons learned, talking about your plan for the day or for the week. Make sure you have some structure around it, but definitely implement a process, bring the team together. Don't forget about it. I've seen it as simple as somebody knows that there's an expert on their team in whatever thing that they're trying to do, and they don't even reach out because out of sight, out of mind. So don't forget about your team. Now, I've got a little bit of time left. I could talk about this for an hour easily, creating agility through debriefing. Now, if you take a look over decades of sales, right? Decades, there's a new sales process that comes out. Somebody edits something from somebody else's, writes a book, and then all of a sudden your organization gets a copy, and then you got to do it, right? The shiny red ball, got to follow the shiny red ball. Now, last 10 years, maybe a little bit longer, there's a concept of agility that's really stuck around, and there are agile methodologies out there, Scrum, the OODA loop, and considering those and, considering what we're using them for, I always find that when we're talking about debriefing, you want to battle complexity, not with more complexity. You want to battle complexity with simplicity. So debriefing is a very simple agile methodology if we create, share, and transfer lessons learned, creating agility on 3 different levels within the organization: the individual, the team, and the organization. So let's talk about it a little bit. How do we do this? Okay, so we take the individual seller. They're going to plan on a Monday, debrief on a Monday afternoon or Friday, depending on, a lot of different variables. Okay. What they do is before the team debrief occurs, they take 10 to 15 minutes before, and then they debrief themselves, right? What they plan to do and what they actually did. That's why you need a good plan, because you need to know exactly what you're trying to accomplish and what exactly occurred. And then, there's going to be a delta, positive or negative. You hit your goals, wildly exceeded them, or you didn't hit your goals. We need to understand why. We got to peel back that onion. Why, and create a lesson learned, which is clear, concise, and actionable. You really have to think about it and really analyze your execution. Then we go into the team debrief. So to recap, we've created individual agility. We go into the team and we share our lessons learned with the team, creating team agility. Everyone learns faster. They're repeating what worked for you, and they're avoiding the mistakes that you made, right? So we're learning and we're getting faster. Sorry about the screen. It's a little bit dark now. Now, one of the things I've heard are these lessons learned, which, by the way, are not lessons learned. I need to communicate better. I need to be more organized. I need to be more disciplined, because communication, organization, discipline means something different to everybody. You need to be clear, concise, and actionable. Now, there's a saying, you can only feel the pulse of progress unless you're on the front line. You're sellers. You're on the front line. So these lessons learned travel up the organizational chain, and they can impact strategic decision making. So we created agility on 3 different levels in the organization. You may say, hey, Jake, this sounds pretty valuable. Then why don't organizations do it? Now, with all the organizations I consulted with and worked for, 98% of them don't implement any type of agile methodology. There's 2 main reasons I found. One is time. Nobody plans for it. Nobody takes the time to actually debrief, all right? I don't know why. We're so busy. Oh, I got to move from this deal to that deal. You need to take time to debrief with your team. More than that, debrief with your team, regionally, different teams, all that good stuff, okay? The second one is egos. Salespeople, egos. Guess what? They go hand in hand, unfortunately. Now, what we need to realize is we need to leave our egos at the door, because it's not about who's right. It's about what's right. So you got to create an environment of respectful truth over artificial harmony. And for that fact, I used to debrief with my clients all the time, especially those needy ones we know that always need attention, or the ones who don't ever want to mention any problems until it's time to renew the contract or the quarterly business review. Those you need to be doing like once a week, or at least at the minimum once a month. And you talk about what you've learned, what you're doing, and you be open and honest and create that trust tree. And you'll find you'll start seeing and hearing a lot more. So even though I love to talk about this for a lot longer, that's all the time I have for debriefing, but you can visit our website and you're going to see some information on all the topics we just covered. So with that, I'll say to you, everything we just covered, you're going to find on the website. You're going to find resources as well, some templates, some takeaways. In addition to that, you're going to find more things that we haven't discussed during this webinar. And with that, I'll say thank you. And we got a little bit of time for Q&A. And I think I'm going to have to change these because they're beeping at me.
So there was a question that came in here from Tim. So the methodology sounds very similar to Flawless Execution by James Murphy. Did you get any of that from there?
I know Mr. James Murphy, and I know Flawless Execution. So yes, some of it does come from that. And a lot of it comes from the military as well, where we all learned it, by the way.
Great. Awesome. And I know there were also some questions that I had answered there in the chat around getting those resources. So I threw the link in there, and then the recording of this session today and the deck will also be in the AA-ISP Knowledge Center. So once we wrap, I'll send that out to everyone so you have access to where to get that. We do have a few more minutes though, if there are any other questions that we can answer. And while we're kind of waiting on those, I did want to say, completely different than these resources. AA-ISP has a certificate in virtual selling as well that is put together to kind of help your field sales teams move into the virtual, just virtual selling realm. So just a real quick training program that we've got with that. So if you have any questions, we can help you there. But I'm really excited. I know when I talked with both Jake and Andrew, yesterday or a few days ago, it is really exciting to see how, taking some of these resources that you have and building cadences and all of that. It is a very simple, and I think that is what you pressed, Jake, is it's a simple process that you can put in place that really makes some very important and changes to that. Okay, so we've got a question around cold call messaging during these unique times. What are your recommendations?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so if you're a disciple of understanding personality types and how to sell to them, you probably realize that most everybody's almost becoming that aggressive type, right? Or, the person that wants you to spit everything out as fast as you possibly can and hurry it up. That type of personality type is what we're encountering more and more and more. So my recommendation is you got to have value up front. You got to do a very good job of providing value up front as fast as possible, and making sure that you've done enough researching before you call anybody. Otherwise, your call is not going to be effective. So you need to make sure that this driver type personality is engaged by what you have to say in a very short period of time.
I want to add one comment to that, actually, Jake, too, which is that the nice thing, it's important to always remember, okay, there's a lot of disadvantages we're under within this pandemic environment, but there are some advantages too. The nice thing about cold call messaging nowadays is that we're all sharing this experience of this pandemic together to some degree. So I will find myself, instantly connecting with people in a much easier fashion, walking through what's actually, what type of COVID response or difficulty we're having today, or, that God forbid the kid comes in, my kids are upstairs right now doing class, and they come in and get involved in the video or something. You find actually that you can start to build a connection even easier in these moments, because we all are dealing with this in our own ways right now. So I just wanted to bring in that piece as well. I mean, the other piece I saw in the chat was, how do you get to a point where you start to build trust, and what do you do about virtual storytelling? The other advantage I think in this time of COVID is, and in any time of virtual selling, is that historically speaking, if you want to get everyone in the room to have a conversation, all your smartest minds, you had to put them on planes or trains or automobiles. Well, now in COVID, we can bring in minds from all over the world to do the best possible intelligent conversation with the clients. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, who's the right specialist for this approach, which historically I might not be able to get that person in the room to have that conversation. But if I can do it now and take advantage of the fact that we don't have any windshield time, I'm going to result in a much more efficient transfer of information and a better close plan and discussion of how to get a partnership over the line than I could previously. So take advantage of the problems that we're having right now, if you will. Turn them into opportunities.
There you go. So we'll do some quick fire here. So Jack, you had asked around how to create the touch cadence. So in the link there to the N3 website, you'll get a lot of information around that. So you can check that out. How is the team debriefing session agenda different from an individual?
So the team debriefing or team briefing?
Debriefing.
Debriefing. Okay. So the difference is, when you're evaluating your personal plan, you're understanding what you plan to do and what you actually did. You're understanding those gaps. When you're going into the team debrief, you're just sharing those lessons learned, right? So you're not really talking so much about the execution of such, because the gold is in the lesson learned. So that's how we minimize time. Otherwise, you're going to be in a debrief for an hour a day, and that's not effective in sales. We need to make sure they're 10, 15 minutes tops. The real gold is just sharing and transferring the lessons learned. Now, of course, there's a little bit more to that. Facilitations, the sales manager or sales leader that's facilitating it to make sure that it runs in time. But the difference is all the analyzing is done by the individual before the team debrief.
Awesome. So I know that we're, at the end time here, and I know, Andrew, you have a hard stop, but we have a few more questions. Jake, if you're good, we'll keep going for just here and we'll get some of those addressed. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us.
Nice to meet y'all. Thanks for the time this morning.
Hey, Andrew.
All right. So one of the questions was around for those who are dealing with virtual sellers who had to move away from the office during COVID, are you planning on recalling them all back to the office, keeping various locations, keeping people at home? And I'll just say, you know, from all the sessions and conversations that I've been a part of, we're seeing those numbers continue to decrease as far as the numbers who are planning on bringing everybody back. I think that the remote selling environment is starting to really latch and take place in a lot of our different member companies, but happy to hear your thoughts, Jake.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't necessarily know if I know the answer yet. N3 was all going to an office. All of our offices were staffed. We're all working from home currently. I welcome the day where we can all get back together. I think things are somewhat easier for sure, of course. I'm just not necessarily sure when. You know, that's the whole reason why all these tools, techniques, and procedures, although basic, are so much more important in the environment we're in now. And if we don't execute to a higher standard, you know, you're missing quota. So when in fact we do, I'm not sure. I hope it's soon.
Yeah. And we've seen, you know, as the transition has continued, the importance on onboarding and remote training, really nailing down all of those different aspects to this, you know, are very important as well. What are your thoughts around sending video messages using Loom, Vidyard, BombBomb, all of that? Are you seeing that working?
So that's a good question. That's a little bit of a differentiator. I have found that a lot of people don't click on it. So unfortunately, although a great idea and really cool, we haven't used them to a great degree, but the people I know that have used it have had really mixed results. I do think it's cool, especially when you can like see somebody and then that sets up the call where they're a little bit more comfortable seeing you on screen. From what I've heard, you know, the click rate isn't great, but it depends, right? It depends on a lot of different factors. Maybe it does work for you. I don't think it's a bad idea. It's worth trying for sure. And then debrief and see if it's working.
Yeah, we've seen, you know, we have a lot of statistics on that. And Bernard, that asked that question, I can definitely help you with that. We have some webinars just around this topic specifically. And, you know, it depends on your industry, like you mentioned, industry, who you're selling into, who, you know, who the sellers are as well. And let's see. Got a lot of people really excited about getting into the link and looking at the resources. Any best practices around driving meetings?
Whoa, that's a big one. Okay. So if you're going to have a meeting, there's multiple people involved. Number one, always send an agenda. Okay. Put the time flash from 5 minutes to 10 minutes. We're talking about this. From 10 to 15, we're talking about this. From 15 to 20, questions, comments, considerations. Have an open spot. So you're automatically saying, hey, look, here's what we're going to do. It keeps you on topic, keeps you, you know, to agenda for the most part. And there is going to be a spot where we're going to stop and talk about this. That's one way to drive a meeting that I have found works really well. Now, the other piece of it is, one thing we didn't talk about is role playing, which is extremely important because a lot of organizations say, hey, Jake, yeah, we totally planned for a call, big call coming up. We planned months in advance. Who's going to do the PowerPoint? What's going to be in the PowerPoint? Who's got whose slide, you know, which slides? But nobody role plays how the call is going to go. What is the prospect going to say? What questions are they going to ask? What obstacles are you going to encounter? How are you going to pivot? Who's going to field them? All those things also come into play. So I think it's a combo of both of those, especially in this world. I found a decent amount of success with the agenda first, and of course, role playing exactly how that call is going to go, especially for important ones.
Yeah, no, that's great. And one tip that I will give that I found to be really successful is internal meetings, right? So you've got that whole side of it that's taking your time and all of that as well. We've kind of looked at something of saying, if it is normally an hour, it's going to be 45 minutes. And if it's normally a 30-minute meeting, let's book 20 minutes and getting people the time back, whether that's for selling or, you know, really taking that and then role playing, you know, moving that into the selling motion, I think is important. So with that, I think that we've got all the questions answered. I will follow up with those who were looking for specific information. And later this afternoon, probably about an hour or so, you're going to get an email from me that'll have a link to this replay, a link to the resources that we mentioned as well, and the slide deck. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today, Jake. I appreciate it, and it's been great to chat along with you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Have a good day and happy selling.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.